Yes, distinguished participants, we greet you with all respect. I would like to apologize since I was a speaker in the previous meeting. So just leaving the red hole and going through the mind area was not very easy. So for that reason, we'll lose some time. So for that reason, we will go a bit speedy. As a person or personally, I believe that these presentations should be in a dialogue form rather than have a monologue. So accordingly, we can discuss the issues more specifically. So this is really a good opportunity to do so. So in this respect, I will just leave my public identity and not to cause any reason for a perception of public and private identity. So accordingly, we will be discussing an issue on wind. For some it may be belated, for some it may be early. With the production skill, wind production, how can this be combined with competition? And in this session, personally, there should be a personal contribution. We know that in 4628 law there were some issues, and as a chairman I'm just stealing some time. So please consider a law. It says that this energy or electricity has to be qualified, sufficient, and it should be compliant with the environment. It should have a low cost. So this is rather a dilemma, but it's rather further than that, or more than a dilemma. So our colleagues would certainly recall the economy course. If you have a equal sides, equilateral triangle, you put one side to be the cost, the other side is the time, and if you do work in a less time, then it should mean that you increase the cost. So it will be. It should not be expensive, it should be cheap, it should be timely, it should be qualified. Actually, when you look at the issue, you would certainly find out that this is not possible. But in this respect, the law paves the way to a gate, and there should be an environment which we call a competition, so that it would ensure such an atmosphere. So what we call a competition is that without having an external interference or an external factor, or without being exposed to any kind of external factor, these atmospheres are called the competition atmospheres. So when we look at the market, we see that there is no discrimination, there is transparency, and everyone can easily compete with each other in such a market, in such a competition environment. What I would like to say is that before we go with the discussion, the quality changes rapidly in time, and whether the quality is sufficient or insufficient. In terms of stability, it is less decisive compared to other energy resources, and this is wind energy. And what we do is that reliable, sufficient quality, and low cost issues. Having all these features, can this wind energy be entered or introduced into the market? What we say is that in 2023 we will have 20,000 megawatts of wind energy, and among our portfolio this is about 15%. So it is approximately 15% or 15 to 20%. It is such a value. So in terms of natural means, but production means, these natural means cannot be synchronized with the competition environment. Then it means that we will have to keep 20,000 megawatts apart from the competition. So the mechanisms in the market, the proposal mechanism or financial compromising mechanisms, are not answering or meeting the required capacity of the wind. So these are all called mechanisms, and accordingly we will have to keep away or side this. So, but this is not what we favor. So what we favor is that everyone should have an opportunity to make a proposal and compete with their proposals. So this is rather a very early discussion, but this has to be discussed a lengthy way. In this market, we do not have a very large market. Many people know each other. And related to the participants here, I'm just looking for a biography here. Or let us do it this way. In order to gain time, everyone can introduce himself, herself individually. And we know more or less every participant, but just in a short way, in a brief way, if we can succeed this, it would be good. But we have just carried out a wind energy power plant. Try to calculate its demand. So this calculation is not very easy in terms of administration, and our colleagues actually carried out different works or studies on this. As the sector, I would like to ask you to focus is that motion, a picture which can compete in a market, how a picture may be able to create itself an environment where it can compete in the market, how this can be possible. On the other hand, we're trying to develop the market environment with a new drop law. So in the relations between the consumption and production, we're trying to balance these relations. And of course, for sure, our colleagues, our participants will be sharing their views and ideas about this. For the time being, we have already exceeded some time, so let's allocate 10 minutes for each of the panelists. And in the last half an hour, we will let's make the discussion in an interactive way. Let's first give the floor to Mr. Nezir. He's the head of department of PUMUM. Of course, our half of the discussion will be on the wind power plants, and the other one will be on PUMUM. So if it's possible that we can introduce WPPB with the PUMUM. Yes, please. Yes, distinguished colleagues, my name is Nezih. I'm from TWEC. I am the head of department for operations, and I will be talking about the TWEC mechanisms and how this mechanism is evaluated, and some statistics I will be talking about. And just before this, on the world, the TWEC power plants, how these are operated in the market, and which kind of incentives are provided. And here, so renewable energy resources, what kind of priorities are provided for the RER? Just in short, one of them is fixed price, and this, the system we're employing right now, according to each kind of resource, with a fixed price, what we do, the RER producers at the level or basis of measurement, we buy them. And the second one is the investment incentives. There may be some public incentives, and these are applied in countries. And the third one is the premium guarantee, and through the market price, premiums are provided. So accordingly, the incentives are encouraged. So there's a quota application. So each supplier or a distributor company with certain percentages, they have an obligation to buy and sell renewable energy resources. And also there are some tax exemptions, and there may be also tender incentives. and some incentives may be provided for some parts, and these are all kinds of incentives in Europe. And what kind of implementation do we have in Turkey, and which implementations are valid in Turkey? One of them is RER producers, when they produce the energy, just like as a player of the market, like a classical natural gas or a coal power plant, for example, or hydroelectric power plant, the energy is proposed to the energy market, and they can have an opportunity to make trade, or they can make commerce. And also we have RER mechanisms, and I will be talking about the process as well. The producers here, they may carry out the measurements one-to-one, and with the fixed prices they have been introduced, they just multiply this with the
are can be used by companies, by plants for 10 years that have been in operation from May 18, 2005 to December 31, 2015. And within the scope of LUY, the distribution companies and the entrepreneurs, if they produce under 500 megawatts, the distribution companies are obliged to buy them for 10 years, and it will be assessed through that. Here, the processes are explained. Until 31 October, everyone can apply to EMRA. This could be for wind, for biomass, for hydroelectricity. And until 31 October every year, they need to apply to EMRA. And the ones whose provisional acceptance has been completed, they can apply until 31 October. And after the applications are assessed and included into the YEK mechanism, they can operate within the mechanism for 1 year. But this has certain procedures as well. And as of the 10th of October, EMRA needs to make a statement, prepare a list, and according to that list, if the applicants, YEK applicants, have any objections, they need to raise their objections within 5 days, and EMRA finalizes it every year by 25th of November, and the plans will be included until the year 2013. Here you see on the chart the set prices for hydroelectricity plants 7.3, wind 7.3, geothermal energy 10.5, biomass and solar power 13.3 US cents. And this is the December 2011 number of participants is the second line with 20 plants, and the total installed power is 609.8, whereas in the year 2012 there were 62 participants with 78 plants, and the established power increased to 1710 megawatts. These were within the scope of renewable energy, but our total established power is 7,083.8 megawatts, and you see the percentages on the third one from the right. Geothermal is 0.2 per mil, and the group that is named as other is 0.13 per mil. and 1.22 of the wind powers are included in the YEK mechanism. In this chart, how do we assess how do we make use of the energy within the scope of the renewable energy resources mechanism? We multiply the coefficient per each source to find out the total price of the renewable energy resource, and then we give this price to manufacturers. But what do we do for this energy? In the market, first, here, as we see on this screen, the renewable energy manufacturers can be hydraulic, it can be wind energy. They are given, they give to the National Energy Center, their daily, even hourly generation figures. And then how do they sell? They enter it as quotations that is independent from the price, and this is assessed in the market that prior to that day. And what do we do on a monthly basis for each invoicing term? We calculate a total price for the renewable energy resource, and each supplier, and I'm not talking about distribution companies only, I'm also including the suppliers that sell to independent consumers, and they determine a ratio of liability for payment. And depending on the amount of energy they have sold, they are obliged to buy a proportional amount of energy from the renewable energy resources. And depending on that ratio, we calculate the portfolio revenues for the energy sales, and we calculate the liability, the payment liability, and after calculating the lack of balances, we send the invoices, the bills, to the suppliers. That is those who are obliged to buy these energy resources. And once we collect the bills, we pay for the bills that they have invoiced us, that is their production generation times the fixed price. I'm about to finish. Now let's look at December 2011, the figures within the scope of the renewable energy resources mechanism. 4.4 million megawatt hours of generation has been made within the scope, and 3.3 million of this was sold in the market prior to the relevant day, and the rest was sold due to the lack of balance. And when we look at the market sales in the day, prior to the day, but it was higher than the amount sold due to lack of balance, which was 13.5 cents. But had we made our calculations better, we were supposed to have sold for 44 liras, and the difference gives us 7 million Turkish liras, which is reflected in our zero balance. In the morning session, in the previous session, there was a question, and maybe it's good if we answer it once again, because someone said the renewable energy prices are very low right now, and compared to the other prices. When you look at it from a single perspective, yeah, of course, but the renewable energy prices, while they are 14 cents, Turkish lira cents, the prior to the market price, it is higher. But an analysis made for the plant reveals that their prices are only 11 Turkish lira cents per kilowatt hour, because there are certain back payments, and sometimes they are obliged to sell for lower prices. So we have to be able to predict that as well. Even if the lack of balance is positive, even if there's a positive imbalance, still they lose. And in this final chart, in the 10-month process, you see the blue curve is for the renewable energy. It is quite fixed, and while the percentages were changing, and there's a zigzag in the dollar. But let's look at the February 2000 syndrome, or the lack of natural gas, and the extreme inflation of prices. We do observe that this curve is not a normal one, but come April, of course, because the rains, the precipitation is high, the day market prices will also decline, and in September and October there will be a course which is above the renewable energy prices, and the reason for that is that the hydraulic resources are not are scarce, so they are treading lightly and carefully in this respect. Thank you for listening to me.
Nizir Bey'e biz teşekkür ediyoruz.
Thank you so much for his presentation. Actually, we have seen the prices that Mr. Nizir has expressed. There is a parity here, and a player in the market in the scope of YEKDEM, renewable energy sources. If there is a parity difference, it means that there is a fact of being dependent on foreign resources. It means that the other side is is higher in terms of competitiveness. Maybe we need to talk about this in the sector. We need to ask ourselves whether we can solve all these problems with the administrative solutions, or should we go on with YEKDEM, renewable energy sources mechanisms. But right now we will listen to Hulusi Kara. Thank you so much. I would like to welcome all of you. I retired from EMRA. I retired in the position of Renewable Energy Resources Administration Head, and right now I'm working in Turkish With Energy Association, and I am the chairman of Audit Board. I will be talking about the sale of turbines in the wind plants. I think there are certain problems. I would like to try to explain these problems. Should we accept the players, or should we consider them as YEKDEM players? We will solve this problem. My presentation is a short presentation, but there is an introduction for this. As you all know, there is a certification of ministry in 2023. There is an estimation of 20 gigawatt to be reached. As we all know, our potential is 48,000 megawatt. In 2023, 20 megawatt can be included in the operation. We know that, and we believe that in the upcoming days in 2023, we will be talking about new objectives, and we will try to include 48,000 megawatts into the operation. For that reason, new legislations are required. Of course, while we are coming close to these objectives, the ministry and its all affiliated institutions have determined new objectives. In the morning presentation, as we all know, 11,000 megawatt wind energy should be connected to the system, and 19 megawatt was licensed up to now, and the rest will be licensed in the future. Currently, we do have 11,000 megawatt wind capacity, and approximately 2,100 megawatt is on the operation right now, and it will be increased to 2,200 megawatt. Of course, there are certain efforts underlying in the success, and TWEC legislation is the sole reason for this. With the enactment of this law in 2005, wind energy potential was started to be used in a big proportion, as Mr. Nize has mentioned previously. In this new law, 5.5 euro cent guarantee was given. With the revision of the law, this euro was shifted into 7.5 cent. This guarantee was given, and I will try to explain it further on. Yes, while we generate energy from wind energy, the electricity generators, as Mr. Nize has mentioned, they can use TWEC and they can sell energy to the public institutions with the amount of 7.5 euro. You can sell in retail or without any bilateral or other agreements. You can sell it directly by using PUMUM, the Market Financial Reconciliation Center. You do have certain rights to apply until 31st of October. This is the most important fact. As Mr. Nize has mentioned, installed power should completely be on the operation. This is one of the most important requirements. Of course, in order to get use of TWEC, Renewable Energy Resources Law, your facility should be valid, but there should not be any entrance or exit within the same year. When we look at this new law, when you enter into the operation, you can have this right for 10 years. And the ones who can get this right are the ones listed at the due of 2005. In the future, we hope that 48,000 megawatt will be included in the operation. Of course, the most important problem is not TWEC-DAM. TWEC-DAM consumers have already taken 7.5% into consideration, as President has mentioned. There's a risk, dollar risk. Actually, this is something that an investor can invest in order to get its return. Normally, as you all know, 7 or 8 years is the average year for getting the investments. Or else, when we talk about 11,000 megawatt and we get 2,000 megawatt of this in the operation, and the rest of it can be in a risky position for the upcoming days, because this big amount, the rest amount, cannot be financed. This is the problem that we are challenging right now. As you all know, balancing is important, but the important thing is that the balancing unit, without giving any offer, they can give a daily working position, so they can sell energy without determining the price. When looking from this perspective, the plant is only a participant. They are giving the daily generation program, and at the end of the day, they sell the electricity. Previously of this, 36 hours before the day, the daily generation program can have certain differentiations up to 30 or 40%. The deviation can be up to 30 or 40%. I have tried to give this. They cannot give any offers in terms of buying or selling. They can only offer daily production programs. They can give only the certain daily planning programs, only daily production programs. So they are selling electricity without determining the price themselves. From this perspective, we need to ask ourselves, is these people are players or YECDEM users? In our legislation, we accept them as sector players. They are not included in the YECDEM users. Maybe there are certain financial losses here, and you can say that these groups can be listed under YECDEM, but we do have certain possibilities, and we can get this as a benefit to the economy. As I mentioned before, if there's imbalance, there is a loss in the profit. You are giving the daily production and you say 100, but you get 800. So you need to get the amount from the balancing market, and if there is a gap between your market and balancing market, you have some losses. Since 2011, with the latest revisions, wind plants are the parts of a portfolio. This is the result of reconciliation unit. If you have a natural gas plant or hydroelectricity plant within themselves, you can evaluate it together so you can reduce the imbalance situation significantly. This is one of the solution recommendations. So what is our recommendation? In the world, we can see many examples of this. Electricity plants generated of wind plants, they are accepted as a portfolio. All of them are evaluated and accepted as a portfolio, and as a result of this portfolio, there is an effect, negative and positive effect, and this effect is shared in the system. If we want to use this group as a sector player, we need to adopt this kind of structure. What does it mean? X megawatts given in the X hour, let's say it is 1000 megawatt, but when you add imbalance situation continuously, you can see this position can be different. What is the underlying reason for this? TWEC, the electricity company and other boards, institutions should make a common estimation, and the system should have this common estimation. The consigner, PUMAM, the market institution estimation board, should have the same and common estimation. In the wind sector, if we create and adopt this kind of structure, we believe that the imbalance situations will be reduced and economy will be benefited more. As you all know, there are certain structures in Spain, Finland, and Germany. Of course, this methodology can be implemented with a change in the regulation, or there could be another offer here. With the new center or with the new estimation model, with new estimations, we can give those figures to the system, and there are some errors in the system, and these errors and estimations can be distributed to all the players. This can be offered. Another proposal can be like this. We can distribute all the errors to the whole system users, and for the other period, we believe that the problems will be solved in a significant manner. Thank you so much.
Evet, biz
Thank you very much, Mr. Hulusi. We received the first concrete recommendation. That is, those who generate wind energy, they should also function as a balancing authority in the market. And I have to, let me confess something. 1 second. we worked on that as the ministry in the past, but we didn't have mature data. That is, on a yearly and hourly basis, we do not have data. So we can, even though the aim is wind energy, it is actually solar energy, because we do not have the because wind itself does not have energy. It's in the atmospheric in the atmosphere. It is converted into weather current, into a current, because it goes from a denser area to a less dense area depending on the other climate conditions. And when you hold the blade in front of it, you turn it and you receive your energy. But there are many variables and parameters. There is the temperature, the density, the amount of humidity, whether the landscape is steep or not. So we need many historical and statistical data. And a plant we need to make the demand projections of plants based on all these parameters. And we have to be that balancing authority, like Mr. Hulusi advised. And now I will give the floor to Mr. Hulusi and then Mr. Ünal, and he is a member of the board with TWEC. Yes, Mr. Ünal. I would like to greet all of you on behalf of the Turkish Wind Energy Association. I am Ünal Terzi. I worked at TEİAŞ as one of the founders of the Settlement Authority, and right now I'm in front of you, I'm before you as the Turkish Wind Energy Association board member, and I also offer consultancy services in the market. We have listened to Mr. Nezir's explanations and Mr. Hulusi's recommendations and Mr. Chairman's idea, and the process, the priority he has given for the after he turned it into the main topic of the I am going to look at it from a practical practice point of view. You all operate in different areas of the market. You are all interested and involved parties. And briefly, you know the current market structure, and you know how those 5 instruments offered to the stakeholders are used. Renewable energy in general, both the investors and the wind energy investors. Last year YEGDEM was popular, whereas this year it is not, due to the fluctuation of the due to the increased expectations of the price increase for the dollar exchange rate, and they were not satisfactory for the participants. And I believe there will be in the balancing market, balancing power market, there will be changes, and the intraday market is also intraday market is with an opportunity given by the intraday market. What matters here is the bilateral agreements market, because the intraday market is a system that is created in the Nordic countries to benefit from the previous day's prices, and the other instruments are not even being discussed. For instance, the financial markets, they are entirely derivative markets. But the intraday market, unless the intraday market provides a reliable and stable price, then these cannot even be referred to. And the intraday spot market prices are reliable, predictable, And as soon as they are seen as reference and reliable prices, then this will constitute an instrument to manage the risk of long-term agreements, which will change the structure of the market significantly. And like Mr. Nezir I mentioned, and if we follow Hulusi Kara's system, actually wind energy investors need uh, support. They do not need support mechanisms, and they do not need comfort. And our small investors, like when the market was first opened for the sector, these were just industrialists generating power for their own requirements with auto production experiences. Because until the year 2011, this field, electricity, was in the monopoly of the public. And they were very brave to have entered the sector, and a great majority of them are successful market players. And we when we look at this from the perspective of small and medium scale wind energy investors, we see that with the free market being available for the sector players, it received great attention and interest. And we have brave and capable players, and we have small wind energy generation projects of 5, 10, or 20 megawatts, and I am confident that they have already switched to bigger ones, or at least they intend to. But there is one issue that is being neglected, or at least this is my observation. The public sector, there are certain instruments created by the public sector to support this sector, because there are serious and sincere efforts. And after the intraday market opened a year ago, and the intraday market being activated, our market structure has completed the transition. It is about to complete the transition periods, and it is going to become mature. And unless it is synchronized with the other stages, there will be ruptures, there will be fractures, just like fault lines. And if one is behind the other, this will lead to a clash, and which will increase the risks. There is one thing I'm afraid to have observed in a wrong way. Maybe small wind energy investors, maybe they consider themselves merely as guests in the sector, and maybe their appetite to become bigger players is not that big. And since the beginning, there is a prerequisite for being an active player in this sector, and that is there is technical infrastructure and investments, and in trained and equipped human resources. Because I'm saying this only for the small and medium scale wind energy investors, because they don't regard that investment that necessary, because the sector, although the number of young and well-equipped and trained people are on the rise, looking at the number, it is not sufficient, because they are merely getting their feet wet. Is it because it is that way, or do our people do not place the same importance they place in technical equipment or human resources the way they value electromechanics? Just like the semiconductors are the locomotive in the sector, with the support and with the requirement which is underlined, only if that requirement is emphasized, they will be strong players. And there's a support on the public side, and I'm sure there's a willingness on your side. So I am hoping that they will no longer feel themselves as guests in that sector or just trespassers, but they will feel eligible to become real players with real methods to support their production and generation, because like Mr. Julius mentioned, we see the light at the end of the tunnel, and them, or like mechanisms recommended by my other colleagues and peers, they are actually aspects, they are mechanisms that are blocked and that reach a bottleneck and that are being criticized. And this is just like learning how to swim, because you can learn the mechanism, you can consider the wind energy as a virtual portfolio, you can balance it within itself so the deviations will counter and set off each other, pluses and the minuses. It is a good method and it's a correct method, but the support to be provided by the public will determine it. But in order to be able to forecast the generation schedule, the companies that have forecast properly, they will object to these costs as well, or they will try the companies that are not afraid of spending and that prepare their schedules real fast, they will start complaining about how carefree the other companies are. And so in that transition period, both the public entities and the private sector, they are obliged to create and operate that mechanism. But you shouldn't be passive about it, because every 2 years or 3 years these need to be reviewed and revised, because there were very generous incentives which were reduced afterwards, which even shocked the sector. But what is the main problem here? The market structure is, it is actually, we see the European market, which has the perfect structure, which is adapted to the Turkish conditions, and this is how the stock market operates, and there are no problems. This is the intraday market comes, and hopefully the financial contracts, when they receive the reference prices, they will be activated as well. But there's just one problem. If the price is determined on an hourly basis by supply and demand, this is the price which is the basis for the bilateral agreements as well. But our renewable energy resources, particularly wind, the hourly generation profiles are they do not match and they do not coincide with the consumers, with the standard consumers' consumption. And as long as these are not matched, because on one side we are going to help the small investors survive, and on the other hand, I'm hoping that there will be a permanent solution to this problem, because our problem is, why are these small players not active players? And what is going to solve that is the pump storage for the wind energy, and the baseload plants. There's a perfect mechanism in DUI, which is the Stabilization and Reconciliation Regulations. Those mechanisms are not used much, and maybe we need to. maybe those companies that can manage it, they don't have the personnel power or infrastructures, or maybe they don't even bother to do it. So in summary, I think I have exceeded the time allocated to me. We need to get our feet wet. We need to learn how to swim. So we shouldn't just be admiring and adoring the system, but it could be the baseload plants or pump storage or the balances that are provided under the umbrella of the balance authority. The yearly generation profiles, they need to be matched with the consumption profiles of the average consumers in Turkey, and otherwise you will always be obliged to sell cheap energy. Thank you very much.
Ünal Bey'e teşekkür ediyorum.
Thank you, Mr. Ünal Terzi. He brought the second recommendation, the entity in charge of balancing. Of course, there is an entity in charge of balancing, but all the wind portfolio, yeah, in the beginning, you know, you always, when you face a new challenge, you refer to the first level or first layer of your consciousness. But maybe we will reach our other layers. We will go deeper into our layers of consciousness, and maybe we will find other solutions, deeper solutions. And now Mr. Onur Yazgan will be speaking. He is the vice chairman in charge of energy. We have 10 minutes, so please wrap it up.
Sayın katılımcılar, hepinizi saygıyla selamlıyorum.
I would like to greet all of you with my respect. As President has mentioned, I am the Vice President of Energy Administration Board. I am working in Fina Energy Company, and I will be talking about the situation that we have witnessed in our wind energy plants. Maybe you don't know Fina Energy Company is affiliated company of FIBA Energy Company, and in the next year we will be using new energy plants, and totally it will have 5 plants. With regards to wind plants, there are 3 different uncertainty costs, and we follow this cost. One of them is long-term cost, intraday, which can affect, we don't know, and we cannot estimate the weather forecast. We cannot forecast the weather in the February for the March maybe. We don't know the kilowatt. There are certain limitations in the trade, and this is the cost of this limitation. And the second of all, you are more aware of this. This is the cost coming from the imbalance situation. There are certain deviations, intraday deviations, and the last one is the usage costs per megawatt. And per megawatt there are certain costs. As we all know, differentiations and deviations can be seen in megawatt uncertainties, and this is the cost resulted from this. When we look at the long-term imbalance cost, you don't know how much you can produce, and this is the reality of renewable energy. Actually, I don't want to touch upon this situation. This is a limitation in terms of trade. When we look at the short-term imbalance cost and the system usage cost, I will try to summarize it. This is the summary of this. We are using 3 different models, 3 different resources. You can see blue, green, and red. Out of these 3, we can talk about one, and the popular one should be estimated. You can see the red one, pink one is the production that we are having in these days. The pink can be estimated, or it was estimated in a better way. You can see these are the plants and imbalance situations that they have in this 8,706 hours. You can red shows March and April, and imbalance can increase up to 25%. Blue is a plant and green is the total imbalance of the portfolio. Generally, it can differentiate between 10 and 12%, but in certain situations it can up to 25% within the plants. When we look from financial cost approach, what is the cost of imbalance situation for one day? Let's say that blue is the plant, and green is operation, and red is the cost. It is 6 or 7 lira. You can see in certain periods, for instance in March, it is approximately 18 Turkish lira cost per megawatt. There are two plants in the portfolio. Net income for when you compare to the individual plants, this portfolio can change from 1 to 2 Turkish lira. We actually sell this as a product to wind renewable energy producers. This is from the PUMUN. There is a guarantee and additional value. There is an X amount, and we can also add Y amount to the PUMUN value. Some companies are also interested in our projects, and for all the operation owners of individual plants, I can recommend them to use this portfolio to increase their effectiveness. As I mentioned before, these are the cost of our plants. They are 6-7 Turkish lira. Of course, we need to ask the benefit of the portfolio and having how many plants. It depends on the location. Some plant can come along with different benefits. In our portfolio, as a responsible of the balance, the most important thing is that different wind tunnels or different wind areas. Up to this stage, what is the correlation in your wind production? As a result, all in all, I can say this. We have talked this in the very recent time with the president. What is the most important thing is production estimation or the chairman system's direction? Which one is the important one? This estimation can change its direction. There can be another trend. So actually, estimation of the system is more important of the estimation of the amount or the production. When we look at the month of October, actually within the last 700 hours, it has increased to 80%. System is down. For the last days, we can say that system is balanced. We can say that if I produce it, I don't want to sell in a lower price. If the system fails, I don't have any losses. This trend should be like this. Normally, it will go on 50%. It will not create any losses. If the system is going on like this, we know that there are certain criteria which create imbalance situation. This criteria will be followed very closely by the players of the system. But unfortunately, this is a very uncertain phenomenon. We cannot understand and estimate it. You cannot know what is the reason for 80% of peak of this system. As a third item, system usage and quality service costs. This is the uncertainty coming from this cost. As you all know, system usage cost is determined in the beginning of the year for the usage per megawatt. But when you shift it into hours, especially in the low usage and consumption time, you can have some losses both in terms of consumption, production, and hours. Actually, there are certain problems with regards to service qualities. There is megawatt and hour estimation. The number is not certain, the figure is not certain, so the calculation is not certain. To wrap up, the balance situation, there is an imbalance situation about 6 and 7 Turkish lira. This is a portfolio cost, and we do have uncertainty cost, and there is a service quality cost when you add up this. And as you all know, the intraday market is important, especially for the short-term imbalance. Elimination is important to enable the trade beneficial.
Onur Bey'e de teşekkür.
We would like to thank Mr. Onur. I would like to add something. The system utilization, system operation, and the tariff prices. As you know, the real existence, the real reason of existence for the generators, for the producers, is they shouldn't, their level of revenues shouldn't be affected. For instance, if you use a stamp stamp system, you can make your OPEX calculations. That could be right, and that uncertainty could it could oblige you to make maximum reservations, bookings, and then you wouldn't be able to use the energy you have in your hand from time to time. But is it the exceeding price of what matters, or does it, or is what matters being able to receive the entire capacity? And you may say that instead of taking the entire capacity, let me pay certain fines so that I will not shoulder the additional loads and burdens. I'm not just opening it for debate. You know, I'm the chairman, so I can say all these. The professor is here as the final speaker, Mr. Professor Ahmet Duran Şahin. He's from Istanbul Technical University, Department of Meteorology, Energy Group. Thank you, dear participants. I will be talking about the short-term wind energy forecast system development project. It's a technical matter, but it can be a solution for your problems. Here, this was a collaboration by the academicians of the Istanbul Technical University, State Meteorology Department, and the Yıldız Technical University. And we were talking about wind, and the new and the renewable energy resources are due to meteorological incidents, weather events. And in this case, there is a new concept, the energy meteorology, both at the feasibility stage and at the forecast stage. And the raw materials to be used in the renewable energy resources is a prerequisite for the sensitive determination of the areas where energy generation will be made for various variables such as wind and solar energy. And when we look at the literature written on it, we see many articles written on wind energy meteorology, and actually it is based on an atmospheric limit layer, which is a byproduct of climatology and geography. And what would you do with that? Here, the location of the wind turbines are of importance, and finally the assumptions and the short-term forecast of the sort of wind source. We were talking about measurements. This concept is already settled in Turkey, and everyone takes action with the measurements. And we are now, the short-term wind forecasts are on the agenda right now. And now that we have all these concepts, we need to calculate them, and we have to forecast the hour and day-based wind efficiency. I will go fast. Forecasting the hourly and daily wind areas as a time series is a major field of operation in meteorology. It's a major parameter. So in short, In the beginning of wind energy, that is in feasibility and micro positioning, and at the end, meteorologic scientific rules need to be implemented meticulously. But it is disputable whether this is done so in Turkey. And the daily forecasts are mandatory to be provided. And foreign companies try to make up for this deficit in Turkey with their own models, because there are certain models that are operated abroad and brought to Turkey, and depending on their conditions, the relevant actions are taken. But there's a basic problem here, and in my opinion, there are similar mistakes in the feasibility stage as well, because foreign specialists may not be that conversant with the Turkish meteorology system, which leads to investors encountering problems. And another aspect is that resources are allocated abroad to carry out these studies, which could have been done domestically. But in this study, we have tried to relate a forecast-based measurements from measurement stations or wind farms using MM5 model data, using multiple forecasts and artificial networks. There are wind energy and SCADA systems, and there are certain statistical, mathematical, or dynamic models, and then we carry out downscale, and we come up with our forecast. And we have average absolute percentage error, or the minimum errors are all taken into account in the calculation. And what needs to be taken into account: numerical weather forecasts, statistics, geostatistics, CFD, and advanced numerical solutions, etc., need to be used together. Otherwise, we cannot reach the conclusion and the result merely with weather forecast model approaches. And the experts need to be conversant with energy, wind energy, and meteorology. Otherwise, it is possible to see many other mistakes. And what models are used? There is the digital weather forecast model, and the 72-hour data has been taken into account. 70% of this data has been used at training stage, whereas 30% has not been used at all, but only subsequently to test our models. And there are
ana atlıktan 4,5 kilometre
there are 4.5 kilometers grids, and with MM5 from the surface with 4 sigma level, approximately. Imagine a tray, and imagine each corner of that tray as a grid point, and this is how the numerical weather forecast is done, by being reduced to those. And then we calculate the slice, but rather than the slice, the taste of each slice. Because when we are talking about wind, what matters is reducing from the corner points to the interim points. That is why we use other models which give us values at different layers of the atmosphere, because we are dealing with the first four, and it changes. First 4 layers, it changes, it goes up to 150 meters. We see the characteristics of the wind station and their characteristics, their latitudes, and here are the general there's an example, Düzova wind energy plant data forecast study. You both see the linear and the horizontal data. We see that the results are favorable, but at the test stage there are certain errors, and these models, I if they do give you such data, I congratulate them, but if not, you should insist on getting these data, because without test data, once you process all that data, that will lead to problems. And with the linear multiple repetition model, the comparisons have been made using the values. This is when we look at the April figures, both the horizontal and the vertical figures are very dense.
İşte Ocak, Şubat, Mart.
And then we see January, February, and then linear and vertical figures, both test and training stage, and the correlation numbers, and the minimum values, and the root square values are given on this chart. And here we have the knot points. Imagine the 4 points of the tray, and increase it all the way up to the atmosphere. There are 4 knot points, and you see the wind values, and then you bring them down. At the knot points, you calculate your coefficients, and all these coefficients have been calculated for all the stations, and the meteorology department checked whether this could be done on a seasonal basis, and we can see that the seasonal figures are much better. Let's look at autumn, for instance.
Evet, sonbahar.
In the fall, there is the linear, the virtual networks are better. And let's look at winter again. The forecasts, particularly when you look at it on a seasonal basis, it is much better. Of course, winter is, we see winter as a decisive winter season, but summer is not decisive at all, and spring is likewise. The virtual artificial networks, here you see on one side you see the test, and on the other you see the training figures. And at the very end, this chart shows, for instance, all 4 seasons and the correlation figures for Düzaba, as well as other parameters, and the grid points, and what kind of parameters you can use at the grid points. Once you use those parameters, you can make your forecasts for that region. So the meteorology department forecast directorate can come up with the MI5 data, and you see MGM research department and real-time data based on wind figures. And these are actually, what matters here is subscaling and your subscaling methods, and that they have been reduced down to wind farms. 70% has been used at the training stage, and the 30% at the forecast stage. And multiple regression and artificial networks have been used, and linear multiple figures and horizontal figures have been given as charts. Thank you for listening.
Biz teşekkür ediyoruz.
We want to thank you for this presentation. We added a new jargon, energy methodology and energy meteorology should be more acquainted by all of us with regards to renewable energy. All these studies are like genius studies because there are some complex structures. There is a numeric methodology, and analyzing and solving it as numerically using artificial grids and multiple repetitions. We hope that our scientific people will be higher in number in order to support academicians or academic studies. To the sector, I would like to address them. There is a correlation, as you'll know, no pain If there is no pain, there is no gain. So you need to work more. But this is a Q&A session, but I have a request from you. Please, we can answer your questions, but there is no repetitive questions. If you want to add something or make a comment, please say it ahead. There is a hand insist on to talk. Please, can you introduce yourself and can you say something about the person that you want to get your answer? Oktay Sekuçoğlu from in the other hall, in the other meeting, you have also asked questions. As I remembered you, I would like to ask a question with regards to a transmission payment. When you get the license, auto production license, who is to whom you are addressing your question? Unal and Mr. Nezir, I think, they can answer my question with regards to transmission payment. When we get auto production license, let's say as an example, we are producing 100 megawatts consumption in production, and we made a production about 30 megawatt. When we transmit it, we will pay 30 megawatts part, and when we consume it, we will pay the rest of it. So my question is that, do we use only 70 megawatt payments, or do we add the counter to the system? This is actually related to my area. When you all know there are certain capacity payments, capacity costs in exit and entrance. You need to pay what you have allocated for the capacities. There is no net or fixed price. There is a capacity cost, and you multiply it with the capacity cost and exit entrance costs. This is the transmit payment tariff. Yes, you have to pay 70 megawatt first, but totally you said 100 megawatt, and in the production 30 megawatt. If there is no consumption, you need to pay for the production. If there is no production, let's say you are drawing 100 megawatt, and you have to pay the equivalent of this. If you trust yourself, if you're confident in yourself, and you are saying that I will produce 30 megawatt all the time and I will not draw about 70 megawatt, you can have an agreement on the scale of 70 megawatt, but you have an agreement on the drawing 70 megawatt, and if you have another agreement for the production, you have to pay for the 70 and 30 as well. Otherwise, you will have to pay administrative fines. If you do not pay for your production, then you will have to pay for an administrative fine. Another question is that
Merhaba, Erman.
My name is Erman. I'm from TÜBİTAK, and I'm also the manager of the Rhythm project on the Turkish Scientific Authority. Mine will be a small contribution, maybe some recommendations. What Mr. Hulusi Kara said for the wind side, it is reasonable, but the supplier must not object to it. Within the scope of the Rhythm project, the central forecast system has been established. For the last 4 years, the tests are continuing because it has been built 2 years ago, and it has passed the tests successfully. And we're at the point of making it more widespread. And actually, we do have an operational central forecast system in place, but it has still room for improvement, and we need to work on it. On the other hand, when we were listening to Mr. Nezir Ay's presentation, the load center, and there was an imbalance of 25%, which corresponds to an installed power of 9 or 10%. But for 14 plants, we make forecasts with 14.6. So the outputs of that project can be used with the present-day infrastructure, which would cut the imbalances by half, by 50%. And in my opinion, my recommendation would be as follows. The others, I think Mr. Hulusi Kara's recommendations would receive lots of reactions and complaints, objections from other suppliers. But certain amounts of imbalances can be regarded as acceptable levels, but anything beyond that could be regarded as imbalance. For instance, 10% or 20% imbalance can be accepted because this is collected from the suppliers, and therefore the forecast errors wouldn't lead to any impacts. But if there is a consistent error rate in terms of forecasts, when one owner of a plant is being penalized, the others appear and emerge as they don't have any errors. So my recommendation would not receive many objections from suppliers. And I also have a contribution for Mr. Onur. His presentation was wonderful. We received great feedback from them. We know that they work in a wonderful way, but if the wind plants are going to be a part of the balancing system, our forecasts, direct forecasts, will not be sufficient. They need to use the prognostic weather forecasts, and could be load, unload, or balance, imbalance, which you will wrap it up, right? Yes, I'm wrapping it up because we cannot be sure, that's why. It's about to be over. So that study was very good. And finally, if we offer a certain range of confidence for imbalance, that system could work for the wind plants, and that was partially demonstrated. And for you, I want to add something. You said there is no data, there is no sufficient data. Use our rhythm project database. If you're thinking of conducting a study, there is nothing preventing you from using our database. So you have reached everyone with your questions. You have talked to all of us. We are running out of time. Just one final question, please. Any questions? Yeah.
Pardon? Can I speak English? Benim Türkçe biraz kötü. So can I speak English?
Please continue.
Okay, I was quite struck by Mr. Unal Terzi, who explained that, there's currently some mismatch in the hourly markets for day ahead and intraday, and the actual fluctuations that you have in the renewable energy, because, they are more fluctuating than the hourly markets allow. And you made a reference to Western or to Europe, and I'm quite heavily involved in market design in Europe. And we are now considering quarterly markets hours. So, quarterly hour markets, sorry. So is that also something which you are considering? Because quarterly hour markets can address the issue, because the markets become shorter and can better reflect the fluctuations of the renewable energy. This was just a question.
I think after the meeting you can ask these questions, individual one. Okay?
Sorry?
After the meeting you can ask this question, personal.
Yeah, I understand that you are retired now indeed, but it was in your presentation. But I understand that maybe to somebody of EMRA, is EMRA correct? They can maybe answer.
Operator.
It will be better.
Okay.
Maybe in future we will use a quarterly market, but now we are using hourly market, and we prepare intraday market very soon. Will be available. Maybe the problem will be solved a little bit intraday market, but maybe in future we can think about quarterly market.
Yeah, because
Also,
I think
we have to apply metering system also quarterly, but we are not using quarterly meter system.
okay, and I was also referring specifically to quarterly market hours, our markets in intraday, because there you have this near to real time fluctuations, and in day ahead, well, hourly markets.
Yeah, yes, we know that they are using quarterly market, but it is early for us.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Peki teşekkür ediyoruz. Şimdi bir duyuru.
Now, I need to add something because we're confiscating time from the other meeting. Now, in our market model, the group that is in charge of balances and the wind energy generators, we told them to come together and to create a group that is in charge of all this, because there was an imbalance of 70% on a plant basis, and this was a study that we conducted 2 years ago. But if you bring 5 or 6 plants together, this imbalance goes down to 14%. And the capacity was around 100. So we do have a group in charge of balancing, and it is in operation, and we do not need any changes in legislation to make this operable. And we wrote the legislation, we sent it to EMRA, and once we change the regulations, hopefully by April 2013, this is our target objective, and we will have solved the intraday market, and we will make it operational, and I am confident that those imbalances will be minimized as well. Yes, thank you, Mr. Nizir. Before concluding, there is one announcement to be made. After tea and coffee, you are going to be leaving. They said they are not giving dinner to anyone. There's a gala dinner organization. After tea and coffee, we are going to have another session and then a gala dinner. They requested us to make this announcement, and please take your invitations for the gala dinner from TUREB, T-U-R-E-B stand if you want to be with us for dinner. Thank you very much for your interest. Thank you very much for your participation. I am confident that this was beneficial for you. I am hoping that we will discuss more and better topics in the future. Sorry, I apologize. We are not making anyone talk for nothing. We need to certify this. Okay, just 1 minute, because we don't let anyone talk for free here.